Yahweh has spoken to you, O house of Israel. Thus saith Yahweh, do not learn to go the way of the nations, and do not be dismayed by portents in the sky. Let the nations be dismayed by them. For the laws of the nations are delusions, for it is the work of a craftsman's hands. He cuts down a tree in the forest with an axe. He adorns it with silver and gold. He fastens it with nails and hammer, so that it does not totter. They are like a scarecrow in a cucumber patch. They cannot speak, they have to be carried, for they cannot walk. Be not afraid of them, for they can do no harm, nor is it in them to do any good. O Eternal One, there is none like you. You are great, and your name is great in power. Who would not revere you, O Sovereign of the nations? For that is your due, since among all the wise of the nations, and among all their royalty, there is none like you. But they are both dull and foolish. Their doctrine is but delusion. It is a piece of wood, silver beaten flat, that is brought from Tarshish, and gold from Uphaz, the work of a craftsman in the goldsmith's hands. Their clothing is blue and purple. All of them are the product of skilled workers. But the Eternal is truly Yahweh, a living power, the everlasting sovereign. At Yahweh's wrath, the earth quakes, and nations cannot endure such rage. Thus shall you say to them, let the gods with the little g, who do not make heaven and earth, perish from the earth and from under these heavens. Yahweh made the earth by might, established the world by wisdom, and with understanding stretched out the skies. When Yahweh bellows, there is rumbling of water in the skies. Vapors rise from the end of the earth. Lightning accompanies the rain, and wind is brought forth from Yahweh's treasuries. Every mortal is proved dull without knowledge. Every goldsmith is put to shame because of the idol, for their molten images are a deceit. There is no breath in them. Let's go. Talking Jeremiah. Section 107 of the Copyright Act, providing the statutory framework for determining whether something is a fair use. We're talking scholarship and research here. Are you the dragons found here in America? Let me know what you think. Leave a note in the comments. You're now tapped in with Dragon Canoe. We're steadily rowing and we're constantly flowing. All praise the Most High. Episode number 36. The Most High don't miss. Let me know what you think. Leave a note in the comments. The Sumerians recorded the legendary flood story later associated with Noah in Hebrew scripture, and they were said by subsequent Babylonian legend to have arrived in their Mesopotamian realm after a sea journey from some long forgotten and distant homeland. Above all else, the Sumerians could write, creating clay tablets in cuneiform. The earlier Babylonian kingdom had been destroyed by the Assyrians, and Nebuchadnezzar's father, Nabopolassar, established a new dynasty and rebuilt the ruined city. Nabopolassar himself carried clay and brick to build the great ziggurat, and thanks to the god with the little g, Marduk, for restoring the city. It then fell to Nebuchadnezzar to finish this monumental task, named Etemenanki, meaning house of the foundation of heaven and earth, and rising in 7 steps. 7 steps. Keep that in mind. Babylon is thought by many scholars to have been the inspiration for the Tower of Babel. The story of Noah from the Old Testament book of Genesis points to the role that mountains played in sustaining the right of the order of the world. A Sumerian cuneiform text dated says that the earth began as a mountain rising from the primal sea. much as the same image informs the opening of the Old Testament book of Genesis, which recounts the creation of the world. There was darkness over the deep, and Hawa's spirit hovered over the water. And Hawa said, "Let the waters under heaven come together in a single mass." For Hawa chose to flood the earth to rinse away its abundant wickedness. Hawa opened what the scripture calls the springs of the deep and the sluices of heaven, so that all the earth, even the highest mountains, were submerged. And when Hawa allowed the water to drain back where it belonged, the peaks emerged first. There, Noah found his first anchorage in the new after the flood world, and he sacrificed to thank Hawa for deliverance. Underlying the promise is an ancient cosmological understanding of the break between earth and sky. The break between earth and sky. We're talking Shamayim. The original world mountain rising from the sea was both male and female, and it was known as heaven and earth. The union of these two elements produced the god with the little g of the air, Enlil, who separated the female earth portion of the mountain Kai from its upper male heavenly aspect. Almost exactly the same myth is found in Greece. So we're just connecting the dots, staying in check, searching for the Melchizedek. The obvious, the apparent, and the unacceptable. The story of the Tower of Babel, recounted in both the 11th chapter of the Old Testament book of Genesis and apocryphal Hebrew scriptures, is an ancient diffusionist myth, they say, that explains the origin of the language in the context of building of a pyramid. The context of the building of a pyramid. We're talking wood and stone. Saying the authors of the Old Testament faced an important literary problem. The great flood that spared only Noah and his family meant that all humans came from this small original group and must of course have spoken the same language. How then could one explain the multiplicity of different, mutually unintelligible tongues to be found in the Middle East? The story of the pyramid known as the Tower of Babel provided a solution to the problem. We're talking wood and stone. Pyramid, Tower of Babel provided a solution to this problem. The Hebrew people had recently returned from Israel, from Babylon, to which they had been forcibly relocated by Nebuchadnezzar II. Forcibly relocated by Nebuchadnezzar II. The Hebrew people had recently returned from Israel, from Babylon. No doubt Hebrew men had been impressed into the labor gangs that built the ziggurat. The priestly writers of Genesis used this first-hand knowledge to create the story of the pyramid they called Babel. Wood and stone structure, pyramid, they call Babel. Throughout the earth, men spoke the same language. Now as they moved eastward, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, quote, Babylon, where they settled. Come, they said, let us build ourselves a town and a tower with its top reaching to heaven, to the Shamayim. Let us make a name for ourselves, that we may not be scattered about the whole earth. Now Hawa came down to see the whole town and the tower the sons of men had built. This is but the start of their undertakings. There will be nothing too hard for them to do. Come, let us go down. We're talking angels, Malak. Come, let us go down, and confuse their language on the spot. So imagine that. Come, let us go down, and confuse their language on the spot, so they can no longer understand one another. Hawa scattered them thence over the whole face of the earth, and they stopped building the town. It was named Babel, therefore, because their Hawa confused the language of the whole earth. We're talking Baal. to confound, to confuse. The name Babel itself results from the very linguistic confusion the story talks about. The mound under which the ruins of Babylon lay until their excavation in the early 20th century was known as Babil by the local Arabs, a name that derived from the original name for the place, Babili, or Gate of Hawa. The Bible writers confounded Babili with the Hebrew verb balal, which means to confuse. Versions of the story of Babel from the Hebrew Apocrypha embellish the original story's theme. In the Apocrypha, the tower is the work of Nimrod, a fierce hunter, ruthless king, and great-grandson of Noah. Again, we're just staying in check, searching for the Melchizedek. Balal, which means to confuse, possibly derived from the Babili or Babil. Balal, to overflow, mix, confound, fade, mingle, mix. Balal, Babil. To solemnize his power, Nimrod built a pyramid upon a rock, setting throne upon throne, first copper, then silver, then gold. There he sat to exact homage from all the people he ruled over. Nimrod built the tower as a way of assaulting the Shamayim, assaulting the heaven, in revenge for the drowning of his ancestors. So Nimrod is trying to assault the heavens for revenge from the flood, for the drowning of his ancestors. He wanted to throw Hawa out and replace him with idols of stone and wood, pyramids, towers, idols, wood, and stone. Soon the tower rose 70 miles high, and Nimrod's archers launched arrows into the sky. Angels, we're talking angels, hurled them back dripping blood, deceiving Nimrod into thinking he had destroyed the inhabitants of heaven. So Nimrod, full-on assault of the Shamayim, gets his archers to shoot arrows into the sky. Thinking that he did something, the angels threw them back, dripping in blood. So Nimrod believed that he had destroyed the inhabitants of heaven. That's a crazy story. Shamayim, from an unused root meaning to be lofty, the sky, alluding to the visible arch in which the clouds move. The visible arch in which the clouds move, as well as to the higher ether, where the celestial bodies revolve. We're talking Shamayim, heavens, the arch in the clouds in which they move. Let me know what you think. Leave a note in the comments. We're just getting into it. Actually, Hawa was laying a trap, allowing Nimrod's pride to go before his fall. Hawa and his angels, Malak, angels, dragons, angels. Hawa and his angels descended unseen upon the tower, and to turn the language of the workmen into 70. They could no longer understand each other. The biblical and apocryphal accounts of Babel touch more on the mythology of the pyramid, from the ego of the ambitious ruler to the structure as a pathway to the heaven-dwelling sky gods with a little g. What's really going on here? Hawa descended upon the tower with his angels. Let us go down. Malak, messengers, meaning to dispatch as a deputy, specifically of Hawa, an angel, a prophet, priest, or teacher, ambassador, angel, king, messenger, to dispatch Malak as a deputy or messenger of Hawa. Many of the ancient narratives recounted in the Popol Vuh reflect well-known mythological tales from the Middle East, many of which are found in their Hebrew form in the Old Testament. For example, when the Mayan tribes made their way to the New World, they crossed the sea, an event that echoes the Red Sea's miraculous division to allow the Hebrews to cross. We're talking Moshe. The Hebrews, as but one example, made much of the number 7. The last day of 7 is the Shabbat, and 7 weeks is the span of time from Passover to Pentecost. The same fascination with 7 is found throughout the Middle East and even into classical Greece. The Maya had the same focus on 7. We're talking copper-colored cons found here in America. Let me know what you think. The Maya had the same focus on 7. For instance, the Popol Vuh tells how Gu'ukumatz, the Kish Mayan serpent god, who brought human civilization and agriculture, spent 7 days in the sky and 7 days in the underworld of Xibalba. As we saw in Pope Julius's theological embarrassment, American Indians in Genesis portrayed all the world's peoples as descendants of Noah's 3 sons. We're talking the line of Shem, staying in check, searching for the Melchizedek. The Kish also give the essential number of their founding families as 3, just as the Hebrews. We're just connecting the dots here. And they recounted the genealogies of their rulers, just as the books of Kings and Chronicles. The Popol Vuh detailed each royal generation from the first day of creation throughout the Spanish conquest. Saying the Aztecs, who drew much from the Maya and the earlier Olmecs, tell of a world-destroying flood, much like the biblical deluge. Noah survived, right? So what's the connection between the sons of Noah, the Indians, the Aztecs, the Mayas, the Olmecs? We're just searching for Melchizedek's. Of itself, a flood story is hardly noteworthy, found all over the world. The story itself among the Aztecs is not remarkable, but the details are. Only 2 people, the hero, Coach and his wife, Coach and his wife survived the flood. In the Hebrew scripture, Noah knew that the flood was over when a freed dove returned with an olive branch. An Aztec depiction shows a dove offering the hieroglyphic emblem of the language of the children of Coach, who had been born mute. A neighboring Mexican tribe adding the additional pertinent details. So we're just connecting the dots. In their version of the story, Coach is called Tezpi, and he escaped the waters in a boat filled with animals and birds. Noah sent out a raven, which is a scavenger, with the habit of eating the dead. He never returned. Only the vegetarian dove came back, and it returned to him bearing a twig. According to Genesis, the Tower of Babel, let's go, was built only a few generations after the flood as a way of gaining access to the Shamayim. So let that sink in for a second. We're talking Coach, aka Tezpi. Similar story to that of Noah and his 3 sons. Saying the Tower of Babel was built only a few generations after the flood as a way of gaining access to the Shamayim. In Aztec mythology, the Great Pyramid of Cholula was constructed by giants soon after the flood. These huge people wanted to reach the clouds, but that ambition angered the gods, who scattered them with fire sent from the heavens. What are we talking about here, man? Let me know what you think. The Aztec myth lacks the language of the Hebrew story, but has the same themes of human ambition and divine anger. The Aztecs, tracing their origin to the goddess Xicoatl, seem to be the first goddess and the mother of all. Xicoatl was called Serpent Woman and commonly was depicted with a snake near her. She sounds strikingly like Eve, who took her cue from the snake and was cursed by Hawa. We're talking obvious parallels here between the Mesoamerican and Hebrews, the Aztecs, Hebrews. Obvious parallels. Does not mean that the Aztecs had access to an early version of the Bible and could read Semitic languages. Rather, they point toward an earlier source of fundamental mythology on which the Hebrews and other Middle Easterners, they say, and later Mesoamericans drew. So they're making connection between the Hebrews, the Middle Easterners, and the Mesoamerican tribes. It tells of a flood story much like the biblical account of Noah, so we find it everywhere. When the Israelite prophet Jeremiah decreed those who still worship the great goddess, these worshippers replied, "We offer incense to the Queen of Heaven and pour libations in her honor." The Aztecs were doing much the same. These obvious parallels between the ritual handling of the dead in the Middle East, particularly Egypt and Mesopotamia, where funerary customs lie close to the heart of pyramid culture. So we're not only finding similarities through mythology, we're talking customs, pyramids. You let me know what you think. Saying reputedly ancient remains of possible Europeans in the New World and ancient Egyptian words in the Mayan vocabulary. So they're finding ancient European remains alongside Egyptian words that they're finding in the Mayan vocab. And they use that to create a model that has ancient visitors coming with gifts of the old world to the new world, or the old world to the new world, or rather the new world to the old world. Mesoamerica and Peru share ancient stories. In Mexico, this hero is Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. We're talking America, the land of the feathered serpent, in the Mayan realm known as Kukulkan. The son of the invading king Iztec-Mixcoatl, Quetzalcoatltzin Quetzalcoatl, was elected priest king of Tula, the capital of the Toltecs. Come on, man. We're just connecting the dots, man. We're back at it again. We're talking Quetzalcoatltzin Quetzalcoatl, the son of the invading king Iztec-Mixcoatl, ruler of the Toltecs. Quetzalcoatl opposed human sacrifice, they say, and religious excess. Yet for all its beneficence, the rule of Quetzalcoatl came to an end. Different versions of the legend give different reasons. Some saying he seduced a virgin, lost a battle, or drank too much corn liquor. It says Quetzalcoatl moved to Cholula, the site of the Great Pyramid in the Mecca of the later Aztec Empire. Ruled again for another 20 years, again spreading his so-called humanitarian message. Finally, the great man made his way to the Gulf of Mexico, where he sailed away toward the Sun Raft. In different versions saying on balsa logs of writhing serpents or of reeds, Quetzalcoatl, otherwise known as aka one reed. As Quetzalcoatl sailed into the sunrise, he promised one day to return. Centuries later, when Hernan Cortez appeared, The Aztecs wondered whether he was Quetzalcoatl returning. The Incas of the northern Andes similarly turned myth into reality by thinking that Francisco Pizarro was the Cortez of Mexico, and that the returning version of one of their bearded white-skinned gods with the little G, they say, known as the Viracochas. The Viracochas. Who are the Viracochas? Said to have come from some distant but undetermined place, declared themselves descendants of the sun, and ruled with benevolence and humanity. They settled on the island of Sun in Lake Titicaca, the legend says, and the marvelous stoneworks of nearby Tiwanaku stood as monuments to their good works. Before the legendary arrival of the Viracochas, Indian life was primitive, nasty, brutish, and short. So before the Viracochas came, a settling, civilizing influence, we learn about the pre-Viracochas past, what the so-called Indians were doing before the Viracochas arrived, saying, all this region which you see was covered with forests and thickets, and people lived like wild beasts, for they knew not how to weave cotton nor wool to make clothes. They lived 2 or 3 together in caves or clefts in the rocks, or in caverns underground. They lived like wild beasts, 2, 3 together in caves or in clefts in the rocks. Talking cleft dwellers. They ate the herbs of the field, they say, and roots or fruit like wild animals, and also human flesh. So what is really going on here? Who are the Viracochas, and why would the pre-Viracocha Indians be living like this? You gotta ask yourself. The Viracochas, under the leadership of the individual known as Kon Tiki Viracocha, changed all that, showing the locals how to cultivate crops, establish government laws, create communities, saying he founded sun worship and taught a religion of love. That sounds very Christian, and charity to all, and built temples and stepped pyramids. We're just connecting the dots here. The Mayan king Pakal, who was buried to Palenque's temple of the inscription, added the name of Votan to his own as a way of identifying himself with his great ancient personages. So the Mayan kings calling themselves Pakal Votan to identify himself with this great ancient personages. Saying writers fall into the trap of seeing them as literal transcriptions of events in which barbarous Indians were civilized by sophisticated Caucasian visitors, they say. The bearded white gods of old were recorded by Spanish colonizers who were more than a little eager to portray the people they had conquered. We're talking deception here. Deception. Such a myth provided a convenient rationalization for explaining away their own brutality. In fact, the Spanish identified Quetzalcoatl with St. Thomas and Kon Tiki Viracocha with St. Bartholomew, saying they were convinced that these saints had made unrecorded missionary trips to the New World before the conquistadors arrived. Describing the Viracocha leader on the basis of what he was told. Come on, man. He was a tall man with a white vestment that reached to his feet, and his vestment had a girdle, and he carried his hair short with a tonsure on the head, in the manner of a priest, and he walked solemnly, and he carried in his hands a certain thing, which today seems to remind them, the Incas, of the breviary that the priests carry in their hands. So they saying this with the Viracocha was dressed like a Catholic priest, In the founding stories of the Hebrews, as but one example, Moshe plays this role. Some saying he was raised as an Egyptian, he gave his enslaved people the gifts of that civilization. He turned them from the old or pagan ways represented by the worship of the golden calf. The clear-eyed monotheistic dictates of the Ten Commandments, some scholars, most notably the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, have argued that Moshe, which is not a Hebrew name, was actually born an Egyptian and later claimed by the Hebrews. Quetzalcoatl, Botan, Kukulkan, Itzman, Itzamna, and the Viracochas are rooted no doubt in real persons. For example, the name Kon-Tiki Viracocha combines three related deities. Viracocha is the Incan name for their white-skinned, bearded sun god with a little g, they say. In pre-Inca times, a similar god with a little g was known as Kan along the Peruvian coast and as Tiki in the Andean highlands. Let me know what you think. Leave a note in the comments. The physical description of the Viracochas along with their theology of the sun god definitely suggests that the origin of these curious travelers was Mediterranean. The stories of Quetzalcoatl and his Mayan equivalent Kukulkan, we're talking Khans here, in both the ancient Middle East and Mesoamerica, snakes were associated with wisdom. The story and the imagery of Quetzalcoatl. Recent scholarship focusing on a sculpted head. Alright, we're just talking evidence here. A sculpted head of supposed Roman origin was discovered in Mesoamerica. Underscores the possibility of early pre-Columbian contact between the two worlds. It also shows that the Mesoamericans paid attention to visits from the outside, incorporated objects and ideas from other places. This terracotta head in question was found in a burial offering made near what is now Mexico City before the arrival of Cortez. The realization raises the issue of how it got to Mexico. So we're connecting the dots here, talking Roman Jews and Hebrews in Calais. Loose. Even if we accept that Romans were sailing around the Gulf of Mexico, how did this terracotta head travel all the way to the center of the country? And why did it take a millennium to get there? The most likely explanation is that the Mesoamericans commonly reused objects from earlier times. We have already seen how they built new pyramids, surmounting and incorporating older pyramids. So they're saying civilizations came and went, they reused stuff that was there. Surmounting and incorporating older pyramids. For instance, an Olmec greenstone mask uncovered in AD 1500 Aztec burial in Tenochtitlan's Templo Mayor. The terracotta head was an offering of the same order, an ancient object preserved from earlier times and used richly again and again at different sites and for different reasons. If we widen our point of view to include the Americas, beyond the pyramid building regions of Mesoamerica and Peru, we discover a large amount of additional evidence. Select pieces of suggestive evidence supported by careful scholarship. One is the so-called Bat Creek Stone, Eastern Tennessee burial mound, buried under the skull of one of 9 skeletons in the mound. The burial was located close to this one individual, as does the language inscribed on the stone, Hebrew of the time of Roman occupation. Cyrus Gordon has translated the inscription to mean year 1, comet equals Messiah, comet Messiah of the Hebrews, when the Romans crushed rebellions by the Hebrews. Radiocarbon tests performed in 1988 found in the burial mound, consistent with Gordon's linguistic analysis. Survivors of the rebellion, Gordon suggests, could have fled westward and ended up in the New World. Apparently, a number of sites with these coins and sculptures, these masks. Bat Creek remains controversial, but the evidence, as we now know, suggests a genuinely ancient origin. Another interesting piece of evidence is the Micmac hieroglyphic system. The Micmac and Algonquin tribe, closely related to the main people known as the Wabanaki, or people of the East. Saying the North American Indians are said to have been illiterate before Europeans. And the hieroglyphic system of the Micmac was similar to Egyptian symbols of the same thing. Connect the dots here. We're staying in check, searching for the Melchizedek. More evidence of 5 small caves in a sandstone bluff in western Oklahoma, known as the Anubis Caves. The inscriptions on the cave walls are written in alphabets that may be a Libyan script or Celtic Ogham. There is a large bull identified with the constellation Taurus, and a cartoon-like version of the Egyptian jackal god with the little g, Anubis, complete with the pharaoh's official flail. An anatomically explicit female figure known in Ireland as Sheila Nagig. So they found these caves in western Oklahoma they call the Anubis Caves with Celtic Ogham script and the Egyptian jackal god Anubis. Fascinating, equally fascinating, one of the cave's carvings shows a clear alignment with the equinox. And in the Celtic regions of Spain, Ireland, France, and Britain during the first millennia and the early centuries of the first millennia AD. There is other evidence as well. Roman amphorae found near Rio de Janeiro could point to an ancient shipwreck in that area. There's evidence everywhere has found what he thinks are cryptic world maps on Carthaginian coins, saying, did Phoenicians, Carthaginians, and Nubians crew together on vessels? So did they team up together on vessels? And did they follow wind currents to Mesoamerica? If so, this would explain the apparently Mediterranean African faces found on artworks in places like La Venta, Monte Alban, and Tres Zapotes. It would also provide an explanation for the python imagery that underlies the legend of Quetzalcoatl, and could also prove to be the source of the sun worshipping. So basically they're saying the Phoenicians, the Nubians, the Carthaginians came over together and could have possibly had an influence on the Mesoamerican cultures, particularly that of sun worship. Viracochas of Tiwanaku, we're talking Kontiki Viracocha of Tiwanaku. Other groups could have also made their way across the Atlantic. The Bat Creek stone in the Hebrew coins found evidence of the presence of refugee bands from Judea, they say, in the American Southeast. The Hellenistic Roman terracotta head from near New Mexico, and the possible shipwreck off Rio de Janeiro, and yet another possible shipwreck off the coast of Beverly, Massachusetts. Roman coins that washed up on the beach, man. We're talking Carlos Quinto, saying the Anubis caves have been properly interpreted, a Ogham writing Celts from Spain where they had mingled with Libyans who taught them about the Egyptian jackal god, they said, made their way at least as far as the sea as western Oklahoma. So they're saying they shared these mythologies between the Ogham Celts of Spain and the Egyptian jackal gods that were known by the Libyans. Yet for all the transatlantic richness of the pre-Columbian mix in the Americas, a pyramid bringer is lacking. Much of the transatlantic contact that current evidence makes likely came after the erection of Levanta's fluted pyramid. For another were the later megalithic Peruvian architecture at Tiwanaku, Sacsayhuaman. The pyramids of Mesoamerica do not align with that of Egyptian, Libyan, and Nubian flavor. Palenque's Temple of Inscriptions, as but one example, is much more similar to the temple towers of India than the ziggurats of Babylon and Uruk. As for La Venta, its tamped earth construction reminds one more of Lishan, the great Chinese burial mound, than Giza. So saying La Venta reminds them most of Lishan, the Chinese burial mound. So we're connecting the dots, staying in check for the Melchizedek, saying to get a complete picture of the connection between the pyramids of the old and new worlds, we have to look in a different direction. We need to turn to that great body of water that washes both Asia and the Americas, the Pacific Ocean. Let's go, man. We're just staying in check, searching for the Melchizedek, man. We about to get back into that Prester John, a little bit of Genghis Khan, man. You know how we do. Are you the Dracons, the dragons found here in the Americas? Let me know what you think. Leave a note in the comments. We out here for this one.